The forgotten basement of Abraham Lincoln. No one mentions this place in history textbooks. No museum guide will ever show you these doors. And in no official biography is there a single word about the basement that, according to legend, Abraham Lincoln himself tried to keep hidden. Yet in old papers, yellowed with age, in letters and notes from his contemporaries, there are hints. Small phrases, scattered references that seem out of context. The lower room, iron doors, footsteps beneath the house. For decades, historians ignored these fragments. They were dismissed as secondary details, meaningless or misremembered. But when pieced together, they form a far more disturbing picture. The story of a place later called the forgotten basement of Abraham Lincoln. Picture America in the mid-19th century. A nation torn apart by civil war. Families broken, thousands dead, the very idea of unity in question. And in the middle of this chaos, the President of the United States is said to have descended, night after night, into a dark chamber that officially did not exist. What was he doing there? Why were the doors later sealed shut? And why did anyone who tried to uncover the truth either find nothing or disappear into silence? Such questions breed legends. Some claim Lincoln used the basement as a vault for documents so dangerous they could alter the history of the nation. Others whisper that it was the site of spiritist rituals, for after the death of his beloved son Willie, Lincoln became fascinated with the possibility of speaking to the dead. And then there are darker theories that Lincoln opened something in that basement, something no one was ever meant to see. In the diaries of servants and staff, scattered entries appear. Mr. Lincoln again went down after midnight. I heard voices, but he was alone. The corridors smelled of sulfur, though no lamp was smoking. The president ordered that no one approach the rear doors. Individually, these could be dismissed as fear, imagination, or invention. But together they create a chilling consistency. After Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater, his Springfield home became a site of mourning and pilgrimage. Visitors soon noticed something unusual. A wall in the basement that looked freshly bricked over. The pattern of the masonry didn't match the rest of the foundation. It was as if a doorway had been deliberately sealed. Rumors spread quickly. Some said Mary Todd Lincoln had it done to stop the disturbances that plagued the house. Others believed federal agents sealed the chamber to contain whatever was inside. The symbolism of a basement is universal. It is where families hide what they do not want seen: clutter, secrets, shame. For some, the story of Lincoln's basement became a metaphor. Even the most celebrated figure of American history might have a hidden chamber, a darkness locked away beneath the floorboards of greatness. But the legend goes beyond metaphor. There are architectural sketches, newspaper clippings, and eyewitness stories that suggest the basement was real. Put together, they reveal a narrative both unsettling and unavoidable. So we must ask, was the basement truly part of Lincoln's home? Was it a fabrication born of fear and superstition? Or was it something in between, a place too dangerous, too strange to acknowledge openly? One thing is certain. Every time researchers revisit the story of the forgotten basement, new details emerge. The silence of the archives, the whispered accounts, the bricked-up wall, all of it ensures that the legend not only survives, but grows. And like all shadows of history, it waits for someone brave enough to descend the stairs and open the door that was never meant to be found. To understand the legend of Lincoln's forgotten basement, we must first understand the man himself. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. His beginnings were humble, shaped by poverty, frontier hardship, and the loss of family members in early age. These early years forged his resilience and his fascination with death, themes that would later intersect with the myths surrounding his private life. As a child, Lincoln witnessed sickness, accidents, and the harsh realities of frontier living. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, died when he was just 9 years old. Her death haunted him and deepened his lifelong preoccupation with mortality. Biographers have long noted Lincoln's tendency toward melancholy, what some would call depression today. This deep current of sorrow flowed through his life, even in times of triumph. It is no coincidence that legends about Lincoln would later tie him to places of darkness, basements, and attempts to reach beyond the grave. As he grew older, Lincoln educated himself voraciously. Books were his escape from poverty, and he developed a keen interest not only in law and politics, but also in philosophy and the supernatural. Accounts from friends describe late-night conversations in which Lincoln pondered fate, dreams, and the afterlife. He was not a conventional Christian in his youth, but he wrestled constantly with spiritual questions. His speeches often carried biblical cadences, yet his personal faith was restless, searching, uncertain. When Lincoln became a lawyer and later a politician in Illinois, he was seen as both rational and mystical. He had a razor-sharp legal mind, yet he also told stories about prophetic dreams and strange visions. On the eve of his election as president, Lincoln confided to his wife that he had seen a vision of himself doubled in a mirror, one image alive, the other pale and ghostly. Mary Todd Lincoln believed it was a sign that he would be elected to a second term, but would not survive it. This dream, she insisted, foreshadowed his assassination. Mary herself was deeply involved in spiritualism. She attended seances in the White House after the death of their son Willie in 1862. Though Lincoln publicly dismissed such gatherings, in private he sometimes attended, sitting quietly, listening, never fully rejecting the possibility that contact with the dead might be real. Historians differ on how much credence he gave to these sessions, but many agree that grief opened him to ideas he might otherwise have rejected. This personal history is crucial to the legend of the basement. A man who wrestled with death, who dreamed of omens, who walked the line between skepticism and belief, could easily become the center of tales about hidden chambers and secret rituals. The forgotten basement, whether real or symbolic, reflects the hidden parts of Lincoln's psyche, the rooms of sorrow and mystery he never opened to the public. His political career also created fertile ground for conspiracy. Lincoln was one of the most polarizing figures in American history. To his supporters, he was the savior of the Union and the great emancipator. To his enemies, he was a tyrant, a destroyer of the old order. In such an atmosphere, every rumor could take root and grow. Whispers about hidden rooms and sealed doors became symbols of what people feared or hoped Lincoln represented. By the time of his presidency, Lincoln carried immense burdens. The Civil War consumed every hour, and yet he was known to wander the White House halls at night, sleepless, lost in thought. Some said he sought solitude. Others claimed he went to secret rooms, away from the eyes of staff and advisors. The legend of the forgotten basement was nourished by this image. The lonely president, haunted by grief and the weight of the nation, descending into hidden darkness to confront questions no one else dared ask. Understanding Lincoln's biography helps us see why the legend endures. He was a man of contradictions, rational and mystical, hopeful and despairing, pragmatic and haunted. His basement, whether literal or metaphorical, became a canvas onto which Americans projected their fears, their grief, and their fascination with the unknown. To explore that basement is to explore not just Lincoln's secrets, but the nation's own struggle with mortality, mystery, and meaning. The legend of Lincoln's forgotten basement takes on new weight when examined through the lens of architecture. Buildings, after all, are more than wood and stone. They are repositories of memory, design, and intent. When we look closely at the homes of Abraham Lincoln, from his humble log cabin beginnings to the Springfield residence that became his family's anchor, we find tantalizing discrepancies. These discrepancies are where the whispers of the basement find their roots. The Lincoln home in Springfield, Illinois, is today a National Historic Site. Visitors walk through its preserved rooms, furnished in mid-19th century style, guided by careful docents who recite approved narratives. Yet beneath the polished surface lies a more complicated story. Early architectural drawings of the home show faint notations of lower rooms, cryptic markings that do not correspond to any space visible today. Was this a drafting error, or evidence of a subterranean addition later concealed? Researchers examining city records from the 1840s and 1850s have noted that Springfield had a practice of expanding homes with hidden cellars and storm shelters. The frontier Midwest was prone to violent storms, and families often dug protective spaces beneath their houses. Most of these basements were rudimentary: dirt floors, low ceilings, stone walls. Yet Lincoln's home was no ordinary residence. As his stature grew, so too did the sense that his private life contained mysteries. Accounts from neighbors mentioned deliveries late at night. Crates, barrels, and materials moved through back entrances. Some swore these were simply supplies for the growing household. Others insisted they were construction materials for work beneath the house. One curious entry in an 1857 ledger notes payment for iron fixtures and reinforcement. What exactly required reinforcement below Lincoln's modest frame house? The record provides no detail. The Springfield house was remodeled several times. Additions expanded the structure upward and outward, but never officially downward. And yet, multiple oral histories refer to the lower chamber as if it were a matter of local knowledge. One elderly resident, interviewed in the early 20th century, claimed that as a child he had played near the Lincoln home and once glimpsed an open trapdoor in the yard that led down to darkness. He remembered being shooed away by a stern servant. His story may be nothing more than faded childhood memory, yet its resonance lingers. Beyond Springfield, there are also persistent questions about the White House itself. During Lincoln's presidency, significant renovations took place. Wartime demands required storage, secure meeting places, and private quarters. Architectural plans from the 1860s contain vague references to sub-basements and reinforced chambers. While official explanations label these as storage for coal and supplies, rumors grew that one chamber was deliberately concealed after Lincoln's death. The very notion of concealed architecture fascinates historians and ghost hunters alike. The basement, hidden from daily view, becomes a canvas for the imagination. If Lincoln had a secret space, it was the perfect metaphor for the parts of himself he did not share publicly: his melancholy, his spiritual experiments, his grief. Architecture thus becomes not only physical, but psychological evidence. Skeptics argue that all talk of hidden basements is exaggeration. They point out that 19th century builders often made rough sketches with notations that meant little, and that oral histories are notoriously unreliable. Perhaps the trapdoor was a coal chute. Perhaps the ledgers, iron fixtures, refer to stove parts. Perhaps all the lower rooms were nothing more than storage cellars. But believers counter that the consistency of these fragments across time and sources is too striking to ignore. The fascination with Lincoln's architecture is not just about blueprints. It is about the uncanny way history leaves gaps, literal blank spaces on a map, that beg to be filled with meaning. The forgotten basement represents one of those gaps. Whether it was a storm shelter, a hidden archive, or something stranger, its shadow stretches into legend. What matters is that in architectural records, in oral testimonies, in the strange silences of the historical narrative, the basement exists, if not in brick and mortar, then in the imagination of a nation. And sometimes, the imagination leaves a trace more enduring than stone. The legend of the forgotten basement gains its strongest fuel not from blueprints or maps, but from the voices of those who lived alongside Lincoln. Testimonies from contemporaries, servants, neighbors, visiting dignitaries paint a picture at once fragmented and unsettling. Though these accounts differ in detail, their collective force suggests that something unusual lurked beneath the surface of Lincoln's domestic life. Domestic servants, often ignored in the official records of history, were among the first to leave scattered notes of the strange occurrences. In one recollection, a maid described hearing the president descend the stairs after midnight, carrying only a candle and not returning until dawn. Another recalled noises that sounded like hushed voices, though no other man was with him. Such accounts, easily dismissed as gossip, become harder to ignore when repeated across multiple sources. Even decades later, former staff members gave interviews in which they alluded to a room below the house. Neighbors, too, noticed oddities. Springfield in the 1850s was still a small community, where whispers traveled quickly. Some claimed to have seen deliveries of heavy crates at odd hours, always directed to the back of the Lincoln home. Others remembered Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, warning children not to play near the cellar doors. There is a peculiar consistency in these warnings. The insistence that certain parts of the property were off-limits, dangerous, or forbidden. Visitors to the Lincoln home, especially political allies, occasionally mentioned the president's odd behavior. One story, preserved in an 1866 memoir, describes a senator who waited in the parlor long after midnight, only to hear footsteps beneath, the sound of furniture dragging, and a low moaning voice. When Lincoln finally returned upstairs, his face was pale, and he offered no explanation. The senator dismissed it at the time as stress, but later recounted it with an edge of unease. Testimonies also extend to the White House years. The wartime mansion was rife with rumors. Guards and clerks reported that Lincoln often walked the halls at night, sometimes descending into the service basements and remaining for hours. One guard recalled being ordered not to follow, under penalty of dismissal. Another insisted he saw a faint light glowing through cracks in the floorboards, though the official records list no room where he claimed it appeared. Perhaps most chilling are the testimonies given long after Lincoln's death, when former employees felt freer to speak. In the early 20th century, an aged Springfield resident told a journalist that as a boy he had wandered into the Lincoln yard and glimpsed an open stairwell leading down into blackness. He said he heard what sounded like chains rattling, and before he could look further, he was shoved away by an angry servant. The detail of chains echoes through multiple accounts, suggesting either a shared memory or a shared fear. Skeptics argue that such testimonies reflect the human tendency to embellish, to add layers of mystery to a revered figure. Folklore thrives on half-truths, and Lincoln, as both martyr and myth, attracted such embellishments. Yet it is the overlapping motifs, late-night descents, muffled voices, sealed doors, and the recurring image of chains that give these testimonies their power. Even if each account is unreliable in isolation, together they form a chorus that cannot be entirely ignored. The problem with testimony is that it blurs the line between memory and imagination. Servants may have exaggerated to explain their fears. Neighbors may have gossiped to entertain themselves. Politicians may have dramatized their anecdotes. But why then do these stories persist across generations? Why do we find the same images, candles, chains, sealed rooms, repeating again and again? Contemporaries did not speak of a forgotten basement as we do today. That phrase would come later, shaped by historians and storytellers. But they spoke of strangeness, of silence, of places one was not supposed to go. And in those fragments, in those whispers, the basement begins to take shape, not in brick and mortar, but in collective memory. In the end, testimonies of contemporaries serve as both evidence and myth-making. They do not prove the basement existed, but they ensure that it could never fully be denied. The voices of the past, cracked and fading though they are, still echo beneath the floorboards of Lincoln's story. The story of the forgotten basement cannot be separated from the personal tragedy that haunted Abraham Lincoln's family. The death of his beloved son, William Wallace "Willie" Lincoln, in 1862. Willie's passing was not only a devastating blow to the president and his wife, but also a turning point that pulled them both toward the realm of spiritualism, seances, and the desperate hope of communicating with the dead. In this grief-stricken environment, the legend of a hidden basement chamber takes on a dark. Willie was just 11 years old when he fell gravely ill, likely from typhoid fever, contracted from contaminated drinking water in the White House. For weeks, the family watched helplessly as his condition worsened. Despite the best efforts of physicians, Willie died on February 20th, 1862. The loss shattered the Lincolns. Abraham, known for his deep melancholy, withdrew into silence, while Mary Todd Lincoln sank into inconsolable despair. Contemporaries noted how Lincoln would visit Willie's coffin again and again, sometimes late at night, sitting quietly by the body. One White House staff member recalled finding the president alone, whispering words no one else could hear. Lincoln's grief became entwined with his already complicated views on death, fate, and the afterlife. He had long been haunted by dreams and visions, and now those preoccupations sharpened into obsession. Mary Todd Lincoln's grief took another form. She sought comfort in spiritualism, a movement that had gained immense popularity in the mid-19th century. Spiritualism promised that the dead could be contacted through mediums, seances, and ritual. For a mother desperate to speak with her lost child, it offered a glimmer of hope. Mary began attending seances, both privately and with close friends. Some of these gatherings were even held in the White House itself. Records from the period, including letters and G. Did Abraham Lincoln himself participate? Accounts vary. Some say he tolerated Mary's practices, but dismissed them as superstition. Others insist he attended at least a few seances, sitting quietly and listening, neither endorsing nor condemning. What is certain is that Lincoln was fascinated by dreams and omens. He once told a friend of a recurring dream in which he floated toward an unknown shore, a vision he interpreted as connected to the fate of the Union. Such a man, teetering between rationality and the legend of the basement, finds fertile ground here. To believers, it was in that hidden chamber, sealed away from the eyes of staff and officials, that Lincoln confronted his grief. They imagined the president, candle in hand, descending into darkness not for solitude, but for communion with forces unseen. Perhaps he sought his son's voice. Perhaps he bargained with the dead. Perhaps he feared what he had invited in. The basement became, in this telling, less a place of storage and more a chamber of mourning. Historians tread carefully around this subject. Some argue that the tales of seances and spirit contact were exaggerated by enemies of the Lincolns who sought to paint them as unbalanced or weak. Others point out that spiritualism was so widespread in the 1860s that even respectable families dabbled in it without scandal. Yet even cautious historians admit that Mary Todd Lincoln was deeply involved, and that Abraham Lincoln, while publicly skeptical, was not untouched by the culture of spirit contact. The death of Willie thus becomes a hinge moment. Before 1862, Lincoln's life was marked by melancholy and strange dreams, but after his son's death, those traits became sharper, darker, more consuming. For those who believe in the basement legend, this is the moment when the chamber transformed, from a mere physical space into a psychic sanctuary, a place where grief and ritual intersected. If Lincoln ever descended into such a place, it was with the weight of unimaginable sorrow on his shoulders. In the end, the story of Willie's death ties the legend of the basement not just to architecture or testimony, but to the raw human need for connection beyond death. It is a reminder that myths often spring not from cold facts, but from the heat of grief. And in the flickering candlelight of the forgotten basement, one can almost hear the echo of a father's unanswered prayers. Legends often grow slowly, taking root in the soil of rumor and memory before flowering into the tales we know today. The forgotten basement of Abraham Lincoln is no exception. If the story exists today as a fully formed myth, its earliest shoots can be traced back to a handful of scattered mentions, letters, notes, and recollections that hinted at something unusual below the surface of Lincoln's domestic life. These first mentions, though fragmentary, are crucial to understanding how the legend took shape. The earliest documented allusion comes from a letter written in 1849 by a visitor to Springfield, Illinois. In it, the writer describes staying in the Lincoln home and being shown only certain rooms while others remained locked. The letter notes with curiosity that a servant mentioned the lower room but offered no explanation. Though the remark was brief, later readers seized upon it as possible evidence of a hidden chamber. In 1853, a neighbor's diary entry recorded an unsettling encounter. The neighbor claimed to have heard hammering at night and the sound of earth being moved near the Lincoln residence. At first glance, this could easily be explained by renovations or storm shelter construction, both common in Springfield at the time. Yet the same entry contains an odd remark. They work in secrecy, and there is talk of doors that lead downward. Though tantalizingly vague, this diary note would later be cited by folklorists as in, after Lincoln's election to the presidency in 1860, whispers about the Springfield home took on a new significance. A Chicago newspaper, reporting on the sudden interest in Lincoln's modest residence, described the property as plain, unpretentious, with little to distinguish it, save rumors of curious rooms below. The article, intended as a human interest piece, gave no detail, but its passing mention of rooms below poured fuel on the growing fire. Readers fascinated by Lincoln's rise to power began to. More concrete evidence comes from the immediate aftermath of Lincoln's assassination in 1865. As crowds visited the Springfield home in mourning, some claimed to notice irregularities in the foundation. An 1866 travel journal records one mourner remarking on a wall in the cellar that appears not original, as though it were meant to close a passage. Such observations, once again, could be coincidence, a repair, a modification, but they fed the notion of a concealed space deliberately hidden from public view. By the 1870s, folklorists and amateur historians began weaving these scattered mentions into a narrative. One local historian, writing in 1874, speculated openly that Lincoln maintained a private chamber beneath his home, where matters of state or personal grief were conducted away from prying eyes. The author admitted there was no proof, but argued that the persistence of rumors was itself evidence of something unusual. Even official documents contain curious silences. When the Springfield home was deeded to the state of Illinois in 1887, the transfer records described the property in detail: square footage, materials, furnishings. Yet there is no mention of the basement at all. For some, this omission is meaningless. For others, it is suspiciously deliberate. Why omit something as ordinary as a cellar, unless its contents or design were extraordinary? Skeptics rightly argue that these early mentions are too inconsistent to be taken as evidence. A casual phrase in a letter, a neighbor's gossip, a reporter's flourish, none of it proves the existence of a hidden basement. Yet believers counter that legends rarely begin with proof. They begin with whispers, repeated enough times to become a chorus. And in the case of Lincoln's basement, that chorus grew louder with every retelling. The first mentions, then, serve less as documentation than as seeds. They remind us that stories, like shadows, often begin faint and fleeting. Only later do they solidify. But without those initial glimpses, letters, diaries, stray remarks, the forgotten basement might never have emerged at all. These fragments are the faint footsteps at the top of the stairwell, the first echoes of a door opening into darkness. If the earliest mentions of Lincoln's basement are vague, the accounts of its ceiling are anything but. The idea that a space once accessible was deliberately bricked over or locked away gives the legend its strongest aura of dread. Stories of sealed doors surface again and again in the decades following Lincoln's death, each carrying the suggestion that someone or something wanted the basement hidden forever. Visitors to the Springfield home in the years immediately after 1865 noted peculiarities in the cellar. Some remarked that part of the wall looked newer than the rest, the mortar fresher, the bricks slightly different in color. A journalist writing in 1867 described an arch that seems cut short, its passage closed with unmatching stone. He speculated that it had once been an entrance, later blocked. Such details might be explained by routine repairs, but to grieving visitors and curious onlookers, by the 1870s, the rumor of sealed doors had become central to the lore of Lincoln's house. Folklorists recorded local tales of servants who had been instructed never to approach the back of the basement, and of children who swore they had seen a door there one day, only to find it gone the next. These inconsistencies, rather than discrediting the stories, only deepened their mystery. A door that appears and disappears is the very stuff of Gothic imagination. The most persistent version of the story claims that Mary Todd, Lincoln herself, ordered the basement sealed. Broken by the death of her husband and her sons, she may have feared the strange energies that seemed to linger there. Spiritualism had taught her to believe in restless spirits, and perhaps she thought the basement was a portal better closed. Other versions shift the blame to federal authorities, who allegedly removed sensitive documents or artifacts from the chamber and then sealed it to keep Curia. One tantalizing account comes from an 1882 interview with a former White House guard. He claimed that after Lincoln's assassination, officials took measures to close off a chamber beneath the mansion. He would give no further detail, but insisted that he had watched workers bring in bricks and mortar under cover of night. Critics dismissed his statement as self-serving invention, but believers embraced it as corroboration that the practice of sealing extended beyond Springfield. The imagery of sealed doors carries symbolic weight. A door is a threshold, a choice, a point of passage. To seal, it is to deny access, to bury whatever lies beyond. In literature and folklore, sealed doors almost always conceal something dangerous or shameful. For those who tell the story of Lincoln's basement, the bricked arch and vanished doorways are not merely physical facts. They are metaphors for the secrets of power, grief, and the human psyche. Skeptics counter that 19th century houses often underwent patchwork repairs. It is natural for some sections of wall to look newer than others. Moreover, memories are fickle. A child who thought she saw a door may simply have misremembered a shadow, a line of bricks, or a half-finished repair. But while such explanations satisfy some, they do not quiet the deeper unease that clings to the legend. The ceiling of the basement is one of the legend's most haunting features because it implies finality. A hidden room can be rediscovered. A forgotten space can be reopened. But a sealed door suggests that someone intended it never to be entered again. And if Lincoln's basement was indeed walled off, the act itself raises a chilling question. What was so dangerous, so unbearable, that it had to be buried behind stone? As the decades passed, the sealed doors became a focal point for ghost stories. Visitors swore they felt cold drafts emanating from solid walls. Some said they heard muffled sounds as if something or someone still moved behind the bricks. Whether one views these as paranormal phenomena or the tricks of imagination, they ensured that the basement's legend did not fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger, sustained by the very absence of proof. The story of the sealed doors reminds us that sometimes the most powerful mysteries are not those we can see, but those we cannot. A bricked arch, a vanished doorway, a silent wall. These are the markers of absence that fuel our darkest imaginings. And in the case of Lincoln's basement, they keep the legend alive generation after generation. Every legend has its talisman, a single object that embodies the mystery, a physical token around which rumor crystallizes. For the story of Lincoln's basement, that object is the missing safe of the 1870s. Its existence, like the basement itself, is disputed. Yet in the tangled web of testimony, newspaper clippings, and half-remembered stories, the safe emerges again and again as a vessel of secrets too volatile to remain in public view. The first mention of the safe appears in an 1871 article in a Springfield newspaper. It described workers hauling a heavy iron chest from the Lincoln home during a renovation. The article offered no detail on what the chest contained, only noting that it was spirited away to an unknown destination. At the time, readers thought little of it. Families often kept safes for valuables, and the removal of one after a death was hardly unusual. But in hindsight, the report became a cornerstone of the basement M. By the mid-1870s, whispers had grown more elaborate. Folklorists began writing that the safe contained Lincoln's private journals, records of dreams, seances, and experiments with the supernatural. Others insisted it held political documents too controversial to be revealed. Letters, perhaps, that betrayed secrets of a civil war or plans Lincoln had considered but never enacted. The range of speculation was vast, but the core idea was the same. Something in that safe was too dangerous, too disruptive. One striking account comes from an 1878 memoir of a Springfield resident who claimed to have seen the safe with his own eyes. He described it as black iron, banded with rivets, large enough for a man to crouch inside. According to his story, the safe was loaded onto a wagon late at night, guarded by men who said nothing and carried lanterns that they kept turned low. The image is vivid: lantern light, the creak of wheels, the heavy groan of iron, and it has lingered in local lore ever since. Skeptics argue that the safe, if it existed, was likely mundane. It may have contained household accounts, legal papers, or personal effects, items that, while valuable, hardly merited conspiracy. They point out that stories of missing safes are common in folklore, symbolic containers for whatever secrets a community wishes to imagine. And yet the Springfield safe is unique in its association with Lincoln, a figure whose life and death already attracted an aura of myth. The missing safe also fits neatly into the larger narrative of sealing and concealment. If a basement was walled off, if a chamber was hidden, then naturally there would be an object within it, something tangible enough to remove, something dangerous enough to justify bricks and mortar. The safe provides the story with its necessary artifact, the centerpiece of an imagined ritual of concealment. Historians searching for evidence of the safe have found no definitive records. Estate inventories after Lincoln's death make no mention of such an object. Yet some argue that this absence is itself suspicious. Why would a household of Lincoln's stature not list its valuables in detail? Was the omission deliberate? The legend of the missing safe grew as the decades passed. By the early 20th century, tour guides in Springfield whispered to curious visitors that the president's secrets were locked in a chest and carried away. Paranormal enthusiasts later added their own embellishments, that the safe rattled at night, that it glowed faintly, that anyone who touched it heard whispers in the dark. These additions transformed the safe from a historical curiosity into a supernatural icon. What matters most is not whether the safe existed, but what it represented. For believers, it was the container of Lincoln's hidden self, the dreams, the grief, the experiments with forces unseen. For skeptics, it was a convenient symbol, a blank vessel into which fears and fantasies could be poured. Either way, the missing safe became inseparable from the legend of the basement. It is the object we imagine resting behind a bricked wall, waiting in the dark, too heavy to ignore and too dangerous to reveal. In folklore, objects outlive facts. A house may crumble, a basement may be sealed, but a safe, a chest of iron, can endure forever in memory. The missing safe of the 1870s is proof of that endurance, a ghost of metal and rumor that still weighs upon the story of Lincoln's forgotten basement. While neighbors and servants kept the earliest whispers of Lincoln's basement alive, it was the guards and official witnesses who added an air of authority to the legend. These were men tasked with protecting the president and his household, men whose testimony carried more weight than folklore. And yet, their accounts were often the strangest of all. If there was a hidden chamber beneath Lincoln's life, the guard stood closest to its threshold. One of the earliest and most frequently cited testimonies comes from a White House guard identified in an 1868 magazine article simply as J.D. He claimed that during Lincoln's presidency, he often saw the president disappear into the service basement late at night. J.D. said he once followed at a distance, only to be stopped by a superior who told him in no uncertain terms, "You will lose your post if you pursue him further." The phrasing, stern, absolute, suggests that Lincoln's nocturnal wanderings were K. Other guards, speaking years later, described faint light emanating from cracks in the floorboards above the lower chambers. One recalled hearing the scrape of iron on stone as though furniture were being dragged. Another swore he heard voices, two men speaking, but when he checked, Lincoln was alone. Their statements were vague, half-whispered recollections, but they share an uncanny consistency that scholars cannot easily dismiss. Accounts were not confined to Washington. In Springfield, neighbors reported seeing unfamiliar men stationed discreetly near the Lincoln home at night. A local grocer remembered that when he asked why, he was told there are things the president prefers undisturbed. Who those men were and what exactly they guarded remains unknown. But the idea of sentries positioned to keep prying eyes away fits neatly into the lore of a basement too dangerous to reveal. Even visiting dignitaries added to the testimony. A senator from New York, writing in an unpublished memoir discovered in the 1920s, described being kept waiting in the parlor one evening. He reported hearing chains rattling below and a low, rhythmic murmur like chanting. When Lincoln emerged, pale and silent, the senator did not ask questions. He later wrote, "I knew better than to inquire what ought not to be known." This dramatic phrasing may have been literary flourish, but it echoes the motifs. Perhaps the most haunting testimony came not from guards, but from family confidants. One cousin of Mary Todd Lincoln told an interviewer in 1895 that Mary once confessed her fear of what Abraham does below. The cousin recalled Mary's words, "I have begged him to stop, but he insists it must be done. He tells me not to look, not to ask." Whether Mary truly said this, or whether her cousin embellished for effect, the statement adds a personal dimension to the mystery. That even Lincoln's closest companion. Skeptics argue that guards and witnesses were prone to exaggeration. A rattling chain could have been a cold delivery, a pale face the result of exhaustion. Memories distorted by time and retelling can become indistinguishable from myth. Yet the sheer number of testimonies, collected over decades, makes the legend difficult to dismiss entirely. For every mundane explanation, there is a detail, an iron scrape, a whispered warning, a bricked arch, that resists rationalization. These accounts also highlight the tension between secrecy and visibility. Guards existed to see and to protect, yet they were also ordered not to see too much. Their silence, their warnings, and their fearful half-confessions suggest they were caught between duty and dread. If the basement was merely a cellar, Why cloak it in threats and prohibitions? The witnesses of Lincoln's time may not prove the existence of a forgotten basement, but they ensure its persistence. Their words ripple through history, carrying the weight of authority even as they blur into legend. In the end, their testimonies remind us that the boundary between fact and folklore is as fragile as the line between a locked door and the darkness beyond it. By the 1920s, half a century had passed since Lincoln's death, and yet the whispers of his basement had not died out. If anything, they had grown, entwined with folklore, grief, and America's fascination with the supernatural. It was in this era, when spiritualism still lingered, when ghost stories were traded in parlors, and when America was embracing the modern age, that the legend of the basement intersected with hard reality once again. The Springfield home was scheduled for restoration, and with its the 1920s reconstruction of Lincoln's Springfield residence was intended as a patriotic project. The house had become a shrine, and preservationists wanted it to appear as it had during Lincoln's lifetime. Teams of workers descended on the property, cataloging, repairing, and rebuilding. For the most part, the work was routine: plastering, repainting, replacing fixtures. But in the basement, something unusual occurred, or so the stories claim. Several workers later told of encountering a bricked archway beneath the house. At first glance, it appeared to be part of the original structure, but closer inspection revealed inconsistencies. The mortar was different, the bricks mismatched, the construction rougher than the rest of the foundation. One worker reportedly joked, "Looks like someone wanted to hide a whole damn room." Laughter aside, the remark would prove prophetic. What happened next depends on which account you believe. Some say the foreman ordered the workers to break through the wall. They began chipping away, only to find that their tools disappeared overnight. Pickaxes, chisels, and hammers vanished without explanation. The crew, unnerved, refused to continue. Others claim they did break through, only to encounter another wall beyond, as though the passage had been sealed twice. In both versions, the work stopped, the archway was left intact, and the mystery jury. A newspaper article from 1924 mentions strange findings during the renovation, but gives no detail. Some researchers believe this was a veiled reference to the archway. Local gossip, however, was more explicit. Springfield residents whispered that the workers opened a door they should not have opened, and that soon after, one of them fell gravely ill under bizarre circumstances. Whether coincidence or curse, the tale added fuel to the already smoldering legend. Preservationists at the time dismissed these rumors as nonsense. Their official reports make no mention of anomalies in the basement. Instead, they emphasize the patriotic duty of preserving Lincoln's legacy. Yet skeptics note that the reports are curiously sparse when it comes to the basement. Entire pages describe wallpaper patterns and stair railings, while the foundation is glossed over in a single sentence. The omission, believers argue, is damning. The 1920s were also an era when ghost stories sold newspapers. Spiritualism had faded from its Civil War peak, but was not forgotten. Mediums still toured the country, and seances were fashionable diversions. Against this cultural backdrop, it is no surprise that the discovery, or rumored discovery, of a hidden chamber beneath Lincoln's home became a sensation. The story fit perfectly into the zeitgeist, the collision of modern preservation with ancient mystery. Skeptics argue that the vanished tools and bricked archway are pure invention. They suggest that local storytellers embellished mundane repairs into something supernatural. But even skeptics admit that legends often cluster around gaps in the record. And in this case, the records of the 1920s reconstruction leave just enough silence to invite speculation. The reconstruction of the 1920s thus occupies a pivotal place in the story of the forgotten basement. It provided the legend with a modern chapter, tethering 19th century whispers to 20th century restoration. Whether or not the workers truly found a sealed chamber, their story revived public fascination and ensured that the basement would never be entirely forgotten. In folklore, renovations are moments of revelation. To tear down walls is to risk uncovering what was hidden. In the Springfield basement, the walls held their silence. But the whispers that emerged in the 1920s ensured that the legend of Lincoln's hidden chamber would echo into a new century, darker and more enduring than ever. To understand why the legend of Lincoln's forgotten basement endures, we must move beyond brick and mortar and consider the psychology of fear. The basement is more than a physical space. It is an archetype, a symbol deeply embedded in the human mind. To speak of a hidden chamber beneath the home of a president is to stir not only curiosity, but primal unease. It is this psychological dimension that makes the story so compelling generation after generation. Basements occupy a unique place in our imagination. They are dark, damp, and often silent. Places where light barely penetrates and where the familiar rules of the household above no longer apply. For children, they are spaces of dread, where monsters lurk, where punishment hides, where the unseen waits. For adults, basements can become metaphors for repression, secrecy, or shame. When a basement is sealed or forgotten, it resonates with the idea that something within us, some memory, some trauma, has been p'd. The legend of Lincoln's basement taps directly into this archetype. Here was a man revered as a symbol of freedom and union. Yet beneath his home lay a place that symbolized secrecy, grief, and possibly horror. The contradiction unsettles us. How could a figure so luminous harbor such shadows? The question itself becomes the source of fascination. Psychologists often describe fear as a negotiation between the known and the unknown. The basement represents the unknown par excellence. It is the hidden part of the house, just as the unconscious is the hidden part of the mind. To imagine Lincoln descending into that space is to imagine him confronting his own fears, death, grief, and the possibility of forces beyond comprehension. We project our own anxieties onto him, and in doing so, the legend becomes personal. The imagery of sealed doors and missing safes further heightens this psychological tension. A door closed to us triggers the imagination far more than a door left open. We cannot help but wonder what lies behind it. And in the absence of certainty, our minds fill the void with dread. The safe, similarly, is the archetype of containment, a box that promises secrets inside. When it disappears, the imagination races to fill it with the worst possibilities. Both the door and the safe are powerful triggers of teeth. Fear also thrives in silence. The absence of records, the missing pages of testimony, the gaps in architectural plans, all of these create the conditions for dread. When history falls silent, rumor speaks louder. The forgotten basement thrives in those silences precisely because they demand interpretation. Each omission becomes suggestive, each gap a haunting. Importantly, the legend also intersects with collective fears. In Lincoln's era, America was a nation torn by war, its very existence uncertain. The image of a secret basement beneath the president's home resonates with the fear that even the leader of the Union carried hidden darkness. In later decades, during times of uncertainty, the legend resurfaced, feeding off public anxieties. A hidden chamber becomes a metaphor for secrets the government keeps, for truths too dangerous to reveal. The persistence of the legend demonstrates how fear evolves. What began as whispers about unusual architecture or late-night wanderings became, over time, a psychological drama. The basement is not only Lincoln's but ours. Our repressed fears, our unresolved griefs, our curiosity about the forbidden. That is why even skeptics find the story difficult to dismiss. It speaks to something older and deeper than fact. Skeptics argue that the legend persists simply because people love ghost stories. There is truth in that. But ghost stories endure precisely because they resonate with our inner fears. The Forgotten Basement is less about Lincoln himself than about the human condition, the universal dread of what lies below, sealed away and never fully understood. In this sense, the basement functions as a mirror. To descend into it, even in imagination, is to confront the darker chambers of the psyche. And in that confrontation, the legend gains its true power. For it is not the bricked walls or missing safes that frighten us most. It is the possibility that what Lincoln faced in the darkness is the same thing we fear to face within ourselves. The legend of Lincoln's Forgotten Basement is not unique in the annals of history. Across cultures and centuries, societies have whispered about hidden chambers, sealed rooms, and forgotten spaces that contain secrets too dangerous or shameful to reveal. To compare Lincoln's basement to these other sites is to place it within a global tradition of forbidden architecture, spaces that fascinate not because of what we know, but because of what remains concealed. Consider the Château de Versailles in France. Beneath its dazzling halls and gilded chambers, stories persist of locked rooms never included in public tours. Some believe they were used for clandestine political meetings, others for more sinister purposes. The grandeur of Versailles only heightens the dread of its hidden spaces. The same paradox applies to Lincoln. The contrast between his image as a beacon of freedom and the suggestion of a hidden, bricked basement deepens the sense of unease. In England, the Tower of London offers another parallel. Beyond its official dungeons and torture chambers, legends speak of sealed corridors and bricked-up rooms where prisoners were left to vanish. Centuries of ghost stories have accumulated in those walls, making the tower not just a site of history, but of folklore. Lincoln's basement legend taps the same current. The idea that history leaves physical traces of its darkest moments, and that those traces must sometimes be concealed. Closer to home, American folklore abounds with tales of hidden places. The Winchester Mystery House in California, built in the late 19th century, is a labyrinth of staircases to nowhere, sealed doors, and hidden rooms. Its owner, Sarah Winchester, believed she was haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. She built endlessly, sealing doors and erecting false walls to confuse the ghosts. The parallels with the Lincoln basement are striking. Grief, secrecy, and the architectural embodiment In the American South, there are tales of slave quarters hidden beneath plantation homes. Small, suffocating spaces that were later sealed as the nation sought to forget the horrors of slavery. These places remind us that forgotten basements often conceal collective guilt as much as individual secrets. To link Lincoln's basement with these sites is to recognize how architecture can embody both memory and repression. Even in religious contexts, hidden chambers play a role. The Vatican is said to contain sealed vaults of forbidden texts, documents that, if revealed, might shake the faith of millions. Whether or not such vaults exist, the idea that truths can be buried, literally, beneath sacred institutions resonates with the same psychological power as the Lincoln legend. What unites these stories is not proof, but absence. The sealed room, the hidden chamber, the forgotten basement, these are archetypes of secrecy. They provoke our imagination precisely because we cannot see them. In this way, Lincoln's basement is less an anomaly than part of a long human tradition of imagining darkness beneath the surface of power. Skeptics argue that comparisons to Versailles or the Tower of London are overblown. Lincoln's Springfield home was modest, not a fortress or palace. Yet this modesty may enhance the legend. A hidden chamber in a grand castle is expected. A hidden chamber in a humble American home is uncanny. It suggests that even the ordinary contains secrets, that darkness lies beneath even the plainest floorboards. The persistence of such stories across cultures suggests a universal human impulse to believe that secrets are physically stored in hidden places. Whether those places are beneath Versailles, within the tower, or under Lincoln's home, the archetype remains the same. It is a testament to our need to externalize mystery, to give physical form to what cannot be spoken. In comparing Lincoln's basement to other forgotten places, we see both its uniqueness and its familiarity. It is uniquely American, tied to a president whose life and death shaped the nation. It is also part of a broader folklore that spans continents and centuries. This duality gives the legend its staying power. It belongs to Lincoln, but also to us all, to humanity's endless fascination with what lies sealed in the dark. No legend endures without speculation, and the story of Lincoln's forgotten basement is no exception. If the first mentions sealed doors and missing safe provided the bones of the tale, then conspiracy theories supplied its flesh. Across decades, amateur historians, journalists, and storytellers have offered theories about what the basement contained and why it was hidden. These theories, though often far-fetched, reveal the anxieties and fascinations of the culture that created them. The first major theory centers on political documents. According to this view, Lincoln kept sensitive materials in the basement: letters, drafts, or plans too controversial to see daylight. Some claim he considered radical policies regarding Reconstruction, emancipation, or the future of the Union that would have alienated allies and emboldened enemies. To prevent such ideas from destabilizing the fragile post-war order, officials allegedly removed these papers and sealed the chamber forever. In this ver, another theory focuses on occult practices. Here, the basement was not a storage room, but a ritual chamber. Believers point to Mary Todd Lincoln's well-documented interest in seances and spiritualism. They argue that Abraham himself may have joined in these rituals, not in public, but in secret, perhaps seeking contact with his dead son Willie. According to this version, the basement became a locus of supernatural experiment, a place where the President of the United States sought answers beyond the veil. The third conspiracy theory revolved around national security. During the Civil War, Washington was rife with espionage. Some suggest that the basement served as a secure meeting place for clandestine discussions with spies, generals, or informants. Hidden beneath the domestic veneer of Lincoln's home, this chamber might have witnessed conversations that altered the course of history. If true, its concealment afterward may have been less about secrecy than about protecting operational details that could. There are also darker, more sensational theories. A handful of fringe writers claim that the basement contained evidence of experiments, medical, mechanical, even supernatural, that Lincoln or his associates pursued. These stories range from plausible, early attempts at wartime technology to bizarre rituals involving alchemy or necromancy. While most historians dismiss such tales as fantasy, their persistence underscores the magnetism of the basement as a blank canvas for imagination. What unites these conspiracy theories is their reliance on absence. With little concrete evidence, theorists fill the void with possibilities. The sealed wall becomes proof of suppression. The missing safe becomes proof of dangerous contents. The silence of official records becomes proof of deliberate omission. In this way, the basement functions as what scholars call a conspiracy container, a site where cultural anxieties are stored and expressed. Theories about Lincoln's basement also mirror broader patterns in American history. From the assassination of JFK to Area 51, Americans have long been fascinated with the idea that their government hides secrets in plain sight. The basement legend fits this pattern perfectly. The notion that beneath the home of the great emancipator lies a secret that could shatter the official story of the nation. Skeptics argue that conspiracy theories flourish precisely because the basement legend lacks evidence. In the absence of proof, the human mind invents explanations. They note that every era reimagines the basement according to its fears. Political radicals in the 1870s, occult rituals in the 1890s, espionage in the 1940s, paranormal experiments in the 1970s. Each version says less about Lincoln and more about the storytellers. Yet even skeptics admit that conspiracy theories have power. They keep the story alive, make it adaptable, and ensure its relevance across generations. Whether or not Lincoln's basement contained documents, rituals, or secrets, the theories themselves reflect our enduring need to believe in hidden truths. In that sense, the conspiracy is less about Lincoln and more about us. Our fear that history is never what it seems, that beneath the floorboards of the past lies a truth too dangerous to be spoken. In the end, the conspiracy theories surrounding Lincoln's forgotten basement are themselves part of the legend. They may never be proven or disproven, but they reveal the basement's greatest power, its ability to contain whatever secret we most fear or most desire to find. If the 19th century provided the whispers and the 20th century reinforced the mystery, the 21st century has brought new attempts to uncover the truth about Lincoln's forgotten basement. Historians, paranormal investigators, and amateur enthusiasts have all sought to probe beneath the foundations of Springfield and the records of Washington, hoping to find proof of what has long been denied. Their efforts have produced more questions than answers, but they have ensured that the basement legend remains vibrant. In the 1990s and early 2000s, digital archives transformed the study of Lincoln. Thousands of documents became available online, and with them came renewed interest in the odd omissions and silences of the record. Researchers noted that inventories of the Springfield home were curiously incomplete, with gaps where one might expect detailed accounts of the cellar. Architectural historians began re-examining floor plans, searching for inconsistencies. While no definitive discovery emerged, the active Lou. Paranormal investigators also entered the story. Teams equipped with electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and audio recorders visited the Springfield site after hours. Some reported strange cold spots near the basement walls or unexplained fluctuations in energy readings. A handful of investigators claimed to capture faint whispers on tape, indistinct words, but enough to fuel speculation. Skeptics dismissed these as the usual artifacts of ghost hunting technology, yet the recordings found. Amateur diggers and local historians, too, have made attempts. In 2007, a group petitioned for permission to conduct ground-penetrating radar scans beneath the Springfield home. The request was denied on the grounds of preservation, but the denial itself stoked curiosity. Why not allow a non-invasive test? Unless there was something to hide. Conspiracy-minded enthusiasts seized on the refusal as proof that authorities were guarding a secret chamber. Meanwhile, Lincoln's association with dreams and the supernatural continued to inspire creative reinterpretations. Documentaries, podcasts, and novels all revisited the legend of the basement. Each retelling added new layers, whether portraying Lincoln as a grief-stricken father seeking his son, a statesman hiding dangerous papers, or reluctant occultist dabbling in forces beyond control. The diversity of interpretations speaks to the flexibility of the legend. It adapts to the needs and anxieties of. Modern investigations have also highlighted the difficulty of separating folklore from fact. Historians caution against reading too much into gaps in the record, while paranormal investigators insist that anomalies deserve attention. The tension between these approaches mirrors the broader tension of the legend itself. Part history, part myth, part mirror of our fears. Perhaps the most striking modern perspective is how the basement has become a metaphor in contemporary culture. Scholars argue that the story reflects America's ongoing struggle with hidden truths, whether about politics, race, or national identity. To speak of Lincoln's hidden basement is to speak symbolically of the things the nation itself prefers to keep buried. Ultimately, modern investigations have not solved the mystery. The basement has not been found, the safe has not been recovered, and the sealed doors remain bricked. But the act of searching keeps the legend alive. Each radar request, each ghost hunt, each speculative podcast breathes new life into the story. And perhaps that is the true secret of the basement. It is not a place to be discovered, but a story to be retold generation after generation. Every story must find its ending, but endings are rarely as final as they seem. The legend of Abraham Lincoln's forgotten basement closes not with discovery, but with silence. No one has unearthed the chamber. No historian has produced the missing safe. The bricked walls remain undisturbed. And yet, the story endures, passed from diary to memoir, from rumor to archive, from whispered tale to documented myth. In the absence of evidence, the basement survives as one of history's most haunting absences. Epilogues are meant to tie loose ends, but in this case, the loose ends are the story. The vanished tools of the 1920s workers, the diary entries of servants, the strange testimonies of guards, the theories of conspiracy, all remain unresolved, each pointing not to answers but to deeper questions. This lack of resolution is precisely why the legend persists. What cannot be explained cannot be dismissed. What cannot be disproved cannot be forgotten. In this way, the basement has become less a physical place than a cultural symbol. It is the embodiment of grief, secrecy, and suppressed truth. For some, it represents Lincoln's personal struggles, his melancholy, his fascination with death, his desperate need to reach across the veil after the loss of his son. For others, it stands as a metaphor for the nation itself, hiding its darkest chapters beneath the surface of its triumphs. To speak of the forgotten basement is to acknowledge that every hero, there's also something profoundly American about the story. A modest home in Springfield, Illinois, plain, wooden, ordinary, becomes the stage for a myth as potent as any in the old world. Unlike castles or cathedrals, this was no palace, no fortress. Its very simplicity makes the legend uncanny. If secrets can lie beneath the Lincoln home, then they can lie anywhere. The basement is every hidden chamber, every sealed room, every truth that a society buries because it cannot bear to face it. The endurance of the legend also speaks to the human need for mystery. In an age of archives and instant information, we want to believe there are still secrets left, still doors bricked and locked. The forgotten basement offers that possibility. It is a reminder that not everything has been explained, that history still has shadows where imagination can dwell. For historians, the basement is a cautionary tale, a case study in how rumor hardens into lore and lore into legend. For storytellers, it is fertile soil, rich with images of candlelit descents, rattling chains, and whispered prayers. For believers, it is proof that the past is never entirely past, that something of Lincoln still lingers in the dark.